As dawn broke on March 12, 1944, the air around Cassino, Italy, was swallowed by a fog so thick and damp it felt like wet cotton. Corporal James Dalton lay pressed into a slick, muddy ditch, his breathing rhythmic but his mind as taut as a piano wire. Not far from his position, the characteristic roar of a German SDKFZ 222 armored scout car's engine tore through the morning silence. It was rolling forward at 15 miles per hour, a haughty, steel predator of the WWII Valley. In Dalton's hands, there was no loaded bazooka, no anti-tank mines, and not a single grenade. The only thing he gripped was a length of rusted barbed wire, crudely wrapped around the handles of two entrenching tools. This was a weapon completely outside of any military regulation. In fact, every officer in the 34th Infantry Division had issued explicit orders. The use of improvised field modifications not found in the training manual was strictly forbidden. Dalton had already been threatened with a court-martial twice for his habit of unauthorized tinkering on the battlefield. But to Dalton, the rigid rules in the Army field manual meant nothing after watching 11 of his men die in just 3 weeks. The approved methods required equipment that they were never issued. Every time a German scout car appeared, it brought not only bullets but also the coordinates for German artillery to rain fire upon American heads. The agony of losing brothers in arms like Eddie Kowalski and Mike Brennan had ignited a desperate resolve within him. He would rather face a military tribunal than dig another grave for a friend. The night before, Dalton had slipped out of his foxhole in silence, facing the darkness and danger alone. He chose a narrow stretch of road where two old trees stood opposite each other like silent sentinels. With the precision of a rail switchman from Indiana, Dalton calculated the tension meticulously. He hammered the two shovels deep into the hard mud and strung the barbed wire across the path. The height was set at exactly 14 inches, just off the ground, precisely at the axle height of light armored vehicles. If the wire were too loose, it would snap; if too tight, it would shatter on impact. He adjusted it until the wire hummed with a low vibration, then covered it with a thin layer of dead leaves and mud for camouflage. Now, with the German vehicle only 50 yards away, that invisible wire lay in wait. At that distance, the scout car suddenly fell into the trap. The rusted barbed wire did not break. Instead, it coiled around the front axle like a steel python, instantly locking the wheel's rotation. The sudden change in momentum turned the heavy armored car into an uncontrollable mass of iron. The vehicle was lifted off the ground, flipping violently 3 times in a cacophony of twisting metal before landing upside down, its wheels still spinning uselessly in the air. Dalton lunged out of the ditch as black smoke billowed from the engine. He did not wait for the officers to arrive and take charge. With swift efficiency, he disarmed the surviving German crew, and most importantly, he quickly dismantled the barbed wire, retrieved his shovels, and erased every trace of his improvised device. When the reinforcements arrived, they saw only an armored car flipped by a supposed accident. In the misty haze of Italy, James Dalton had proven that sometimes, a piece of wire and the will to protect one's comrades are more powerful than the grandest of military doctrines. The roots of James Dalton's daring action in Italy did not begin with lectures in a military academy, but in the grease-stained rail yards of Gary, Indiana. Born into a quintessential American steelworking family, Jimmy Dalton's life was surrounded by the deafening roar of blast furnaces and the pungent scent of rusting iron. His father, a weathered man, labored 15 hours a day beside molten streams of fire to feed 6 children. In that world, waste was a crime, and repurposing scrap metal to keep things running was a vital survival skill. Instead of sitting in cramped classrooms, Jimmy spent most of his childhood at train stations and loading docks. Here, he did more than just play, he observed. He learned how a 1,000-ton train could change direction thanks to a single small iron lever, and how a reinforced cable placed in the right spot could prevent a massive machine from collapsing. At 17, he became a switchman. This job required a sharp systemic mindset. You had to foresee how a faulty connection at one end could cause a catastrophic derailment at the other. To Jimmy, the world was a series of interconnected mechanisms where complex problems often had incredibly simple physical solutions. In January 1943, 3 months after turning 19, Dalton enlisted with faith in the opportunities the military promised. However, reality was a cold wake-up call. After 8 weeks of rushed basic training with obsolete rifles, he was thrust into the North African theater, and later, the rugged mountains of Italy. Here, his railworker's intuition collided head-on with the rigidity of the military bureaucracy. The army taught him that doctrine was supreme, but the battlefield taught him that doctrine was often a step behind reality. His 34th Infantry Division was being bled dry by German reconnaissance units. The SDKFZ 222 armored cars were not just vehicles, they were ghosts that moved with lightning speed, appearing at dawn and dusk to mark American positions before vanishing. Dalton observed the authorized methods of containment, such as using bazookas or mines, and identified a fatal flaw: they required perfect logistical supply, something they never had in the Italian mud. He watched his friends fall while trying to follow the textbook to the letter. Eddie Kowalski died when rifle rounds ricocheted off the scout car's armor. Mike Brennan perished trying to toss a grenade at a speeding vehicle. In Dalton's mind, those deaths were more than tragedies, they were preventable derailments. He realized that the armored car, however terrifying, was merely a mechanical system with physical weaknesses. With the mindset of a man who once managed gargantuan trains, Dalton understood that he didn't need a massive explosion to destroy that system, he only needed a sudden stop at the critical point, the axle. The night of March 10, 1944, was a sleepless one for James Dalton. After witnessing 2 more friends fall under the 20mm cannons of German scout cars, his patience had finally run out. Dalton slipped out of his foxhole, carrying items that any officer would have regarded as trash: a roll of rusted barbed wire scavenged from ruined fences and 2 standard-issue entrenching shovels. In the thick darkness of the WWII Valley, where the fog clung like a shroud, he began to realize a plan forged from years of experience in the Indiana rail yards. Dalton chose a strategic location, a bottleneck stretch of trail nestled between 2 ancient oak trees. He understood that velocity was the greatest strength of the SDKFZ 222 scout car, but also its fatal flaw. With the calloused hands of a steelworker, he began to dig. He hammered the 2 shovels deep into the hard mud, transforming them into living anchor posts. Then, he strung the barbed wire across the road. This was the most critical step. The wire had to be placed at a precise height of 14 inches from the ground. Why 14 inches? Because that was the center axle height of the German light armor's front wheels. Dalton adjusted the tension of the wire with extreme care, relying on tactile intuition. If the wire were too loose, the multi-ton vehicle would simply roll over it; if too tight, it would snap instantly under the impact. He needed a perfect balance, a wire with enough elasticity to wrap around the axle but enough strength to lock it dead. When the wire emitted a low ping when flicked, Dalton knew he had succeeded. He camouflaged the scene with a thin layer of mud and dry leaves to erase all signs of human interference. As dawn broke through the damp mist, the roaring engine of the German scout car echoed. The SDKFZ 222 was speeding with the confidence of an unchallenged predator. At 50 yards, then 20, Dalton held his breath. The moment the front wheel struck the wire, an irreversible chain reaction of physics occurred. The barbed wire did not snap. Instead, it was sucked into the gap between the wheel and the axle, coiling tightly around the mechanical parts in a single rotation. The sudden locking of the front axle at high speed converted the vehicle's kinetic energy into a violent torsional force. The armored car's rear end was catapulted into the air, flipping 3 times like a trapped beast. The sound of twisting metal and the muffled scream of the engine resonated through the valley. As the vehicle lay upside down, its rear wheels still spinning hopelessly in the air, Dalton lunged from his hiding spot. He quickly disarmed the stunned crew and, most importantly, swiftly retrieved the wire and the 2 shovels. When officers arrived on the scene minutes later, they saw only a flipped armored wreck, an incident they concluded was due to bad terrain. But for Dalton, it was the start of a silent revolution, where a length of barbed wire had defeated a sophisticated war machine. Following the flip of the SDKFZ-222, a strange atmosphere settled over the 34th Infantry Division. Officers reported to battalion headquarters that the German armored car had overturned due to unstable geological terrain and driver error. It was a safe explanation for everyone. However, down in the foxholes and muddy trenches, a different truth was being whispered with lightning speed. The soldiers didn't need official reports to know what had truly saved their lives. James Dalton's name began to appear in hushed conversations around field campfires. Privates and corporals from neighboring platoons started slipping into Dalton's position at night. They didn't come to borrow ammunition, they came to ask about the wire. Dalton, with the humble nature of a rail worker, meticulously instructed them on how to choose the most elastic barbed wire, how to anchor the shovels so they wouldn't uproot, and most importantly, the legendary 14-inch figure. Dalton's innovation created an unstoppable chain reaction. Across the roads leading into Casino, strange accidents began occurring with dense frequency. The German scout cars, once objects of pure terror, became timid. The Germans could not understand why their sophisticated armored vehicles were repeatedly flipping on seemingly flat paths. German patrols began to dismount and walk, the speed of reconnaissance slowed, and most critically, the directed artillery strikes that had claimed thousands of lives dropped significantly. Division command was not blind. They saw the reports of armored wrecks lying belly up on the roads. They saw the rusted barbed wire left behind in the haste of battle. But they also saw the American casualty charts dropping spectacularly. An unwritten compromise was formed. Officers looked the other way when they saw their men wrapping barbed wire around bicycles or carrying spools not found in the supply catalog. Officially recognizing Dalton's method would have been a slap in the face to the doctrine writers at the Pentagon, those who believed only expensive weapons could destroy tanks. Instead of dragging Dalton before a court-martial as previously threatened, they chose a more sophisticated solution: deliberate silence. Dalton was reassigned from the front lines to perform a mission with no official name: Field Technical Advisor. He traveled from unit to unit, teaching soldiers how to use scrap metal to defeat technology. No medals were awarded, no newspaper articles praised the corporal from Indiana. His victory was a silent one, measured by the number of fathers and husbands who returned home safely instead of remaining in the Italian mud. James Dalton changed the war not with a loud bang, but with a wire that quietly tightened around the enemy's wheels. As the final echoes of World War II faded into history, James Dalton quietly packed his bags and returned to his hometown of Gary, Indiana. There were no brass bands to greet him, no grand parades for the corporal who had defeated German armor with barbed wire. He returned to the familiar rail yards where freight cars thundered day and night. For the next 4 decades, Dalton continued his work as a switchman and mechanic, living a modest life with his wife and children. His past in Italy was tucked away in a drawer of his memory. He rarely spoke of the war, and absolutely never mentioned the wire that had saved an entire company. Recognition for Dalton did not come through certificates of merit, but silently through the flow of military history. Years after the war, tactical experts began incorporating axle height cable obstacles into official manuals to counter fast-moving vehicles. They called it a lesson learned from the Italian field, a vague and anonymous attribution. Dalton himself was never bothered by this. For him, the greatest reward was not having his name engraved on a plaque, but the peaceful silence of empty graves, the friends who did not have to remain in Cassino thanks to a daring idea. James Dalton passed away as he had lived, humble and quiet. His name may fade from official history books that prioritize grand campaigns and famous generals. Yet, his legacy lives on in every soldier who knows how to use intellect to compensate for a lack of weaponry. He remains the most vivid proof of an eternal truth: in war, the true hero is sometimes not the one holding the most advanced weapons, but the one with the courage to listen to intuition and the love for their comrades to break soulless rules. The story of James Dalton is not just a wartime anecdote about cleverness, it is a timeless lesson in grassroots innovation. It proves that the greatest solutions often do not emerge from modern laboratories or high-level military committees, but from the hearts of those directly facing danger. Dalton's greatest value was not just the barbed wire itself, but the courage to challenge obsolete doctrines to protect human life. He teaches us that when the system fails, creativity and brotherhood become the ultimate weapons to change destiny. History sometimes forgets quiet heroes like James Dalton, but we do not have to. If you were inspired by this soldier mechanic's intellect and bravery, please like and share this video to honor the power of silent innovation. Click subscribe and turn on notifications to continue exploring the most inspiring hidden corners of history with us. Comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe that creativity can overcome any rigid rule? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.